Okay, welcome everybody today. I hope the sound is okay and I hope the picture is okay. Today we're going to look at rhetorical devices. I hope that we're going to see, I know that we're going to see some of the rhetorical devices that we talked about in the last 3 lessons. We're going to see how the great authors use these rhetorical devices. They're very aware of these rhetorical devices. And if you are aware of the same rhetorical devices, you will be able to use them as well. Not only in your writing, but also in your speaking. So I've actually just started reading this book, Ray Bradbury, Something Wicked This Way Comes. I've only got to chapter 5, which is, the chapters are very small. It's not even page 20. I think it's about, oh no, it is. It's page 22 I've got to. So you can see I've folded over. I always do that. And we're going to look at that book second. I'm actually a very big fan of Edgar Allan Poe. He's obviously a great writer. And I wanted to just show you that even if I hadn't picked Ray Bradbury, which is just the book I'm reading at the moment, even if I picked a different book like Edgar Allan Poe, we're just going to look at the first page of some of his stories, because I hope to show you all that his stories also use the same rhetorical devices that Ray Bradbury's use, and they are very well known, these rhetorical devices. So you could also use them, as I said before, not only in your writing but also in your speaking. So let's have a look at a very famous story by Edgar Allan Poe. It's called William Wilson. It's an excellent story. And if we look just at the first page of this book, I've underlined some parts. And the parts which are underlined are the rhetorical devices. Now, from this lesson today, the main rhetorical device that you'll see being used is repetition. And it doesn't matter whether we call it anaphora or epistrophe. There are many different words for different kinds of repetition. We also had anadiplosis. They're all forms of repetition in literature. Now let's have a look at this very first page from Poe's William Wilson. And the first part I've underlined is the following sentence. This has been already too much an object for the scorn, for the horror, for the detestation of my race. So I hope you can see that there's a perfect example of the rule of 3 being used, and it's also a great example of parallel structure. We've got 3 prepositional phrases, all starting with for the, and then followed by a noun. For the scorn, for the horror, for the detestation of my race. So that's a very good example of the rule of 3. It's also a great example of parallel structure. And it's a good example of a prepositional phrase which comes as a group of 3 and repeats the for the. Now, if we look further down, there's a little bit of repetition of outcast of all outcasts. But then there's also to its honours, to its flowers, to its golden aspirations. So I'm going to read all of that sentence. To its honours, to its flowers, to its golden aspirations, and a cloud, dense, dismal and limitless, does it not hang eternally between thy hopes and heaven? So you've got an excellent example there of firstly one prepositional phrase being repeated 3 times, for the scorn, for the horror, for the detestation, and then another prepositional phrase also composed of 3 words being repeated 3 times. Here is our golden rule of 3. To its honours, to its flowers, to its golden aspirations. And I hope that you can see when you write it down, and I've written it down here, for the scorn, for the horror, for the detestation, to its honours, to its flowers, to its golden aspirations. I hope you can even hear the poetic style that Edgar Allan Poe employs in his books in order to improve the rhetoric, to improve how it sounds. And I've also got the 3 adjectives there which he went through. So he certainly was aware of the rule of 3, and he was certainly aware of parallel structure for his prepositional phrases, for example, but not only. Now, if we look a little bit further down the page, we don't have to go far before we see I would, He has 3 hypothetical sentences. He has, I would fain have them believe that I have been, blah, blah, blah. Then he has, I would wish them to seek out for me, blah, blah, blah. And then he has, I would have them allow that, although temptation. Yeah? And so we've got I would, I would, I would. Again, our rule of 3 and repetition being employed to get a nice rhetorical effect. And then right at the end, and is it therefore that he has never thus suffered? Have I not indeed been living in a dream? And am I not now dying a victim to the horror and the mystery of the wildest of all sublunary visions? Notice 3 questions right at the end of the second paragraph. So Poe certainly understands this rhetorical device of the rule of 3, and he employs it extensively in his writing. And if you don't believe me, we'll just go to another one of his stories and we'll only look at the first page again. We're going to look at the story The Telltale Heart, which is also quite a famous story. If I can find it, there it is. It's quite a short story if anyone's interested in reading it, but it does employ very difficult language, that's true. So, firstly, we have, for the rule of 3, I've got this highlighted in blue pen. We have with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation. So you can see you've got with what, and a noun again being employed. So this is definitely the rule of 3. It's definitely parallel structure. You could consider it a prepositional phrase again of 3 words being repeated 3 times, just like we saw with for the scorn, for the horror, for the detestation, to its honours, to its flowers, to its golden aspirations. So the same trick is being employed by Poe in yet another story. And at the bottom we have, I undid the lantern cautiously, oh so cautiously, cautiously. So here he is again repeating the same word 3 times. And I don't think it's an accident that he's done this. I think that he is well aware of the rule of 3. And we can see it one more time at the start of The Black Cat, which is here. Another very famous story by Poe. And he's got on the very first paragraph, these events have terrified, have tortured, have destroyed me. So you can see that this rule of 3, it's something which Edgar Allan Poe certainly likes to use. So what about Ray Bradbury? Does he like the rule of 3? Is this something that he has heard of? Let's have a look at the very first page, and you can probably already guess the answer. Now, I want you to understand that this title, Something Wicked This Way Comes, if you're familiar with Shakespeare, if you know your Macbeth, you will recognise this phrase. It comes along in the phrase, by the pricking of my thumbs, something wicked this way comes. And it is one of the 3 witches who says this, I believe, although I haven't checked it, but I think it's one of the witches who says, by the pricking of my thumbs, something wicked this way comes. So he's alluding to Macbeth in the title. There is an allusion there. And remember that the witches in Macbeth, they prophesied, they had a dark omen in their prophecy that Macbeth would become king or would become the Lord of Cawdor, and so they were talking about something in the future which would be wicked. Now at the start of this book, Ray Bradbury's book, he also wants to create something like the same effect. But I want you to see what he does, something very clever in the second paragraph. So the salesman jangled and clanged his huge leather kit, in which oversized puzzles of ironmongery lay unseen, but which his tongue conjured from door to door until he came at last to a lawn, which was cut all wrong. Now, the first thing you should notice there is that there are indeed 3 witches. And I don't believe that that is a coincidence. I think that Ray Bradbury knew exactly what he was doing when he gave the book the title Something Wicked This Way Comes, and then used 3 following the rule of 3, he used 3 witches in the second paragraph. Now I know it's not spelt the same as witch, but I think that he did this on purpose. I think that he wanted to leave the sound witch in our mind 3 times in order to make the story more spooky and in order to remind us of that start of the very famous play Macbeth, where an evil prophecy had been had been declared by the three witches. Now, he goes on to use a lot of other rhetorical devices, particularly in this part here. I'm going to read out the whole sentence because there's a lot of repetition. There's certainly the rule of three as well. It's here where it starts. Of a like size and general shape, the boys sat carving twig whistles, talking of olden or future times, content with having left their fingerprints on every movable object in Greentown during the summer past, and their footprints on every open path between there and the lake and there and the river, since school began. So we've got repetition of, firstly we've got carving, talking, and content with having. We've got that repetition following the rule of three. And then we've got repeated their fingerprints on every movable object and their footprints on every open path. So fingerprints on every, footprints on every, the repetition is clearly there. And then we've got there and the lake and there and the river. So notice that we've got four theirs. We've got having left their fingerprints, their footprints, there and the lake, there and the river. So you can see that Bradbury is also employing a very poetic style here. Now, in a lot of sentences, you will see this rule of three. You will see the salesman walked, stopped, and hunched his shoulders. And of course, we need that comma there to split up the first two verbs. There's a good example here at the bottom of a participle which doesn't have a comma before it, because it's referring to the sky. And then on the next sentence, a participle which does have a comma before it, because it's referring to he. So don't forget about those participles and commas. They're very useful indeed. But actually, this kind of style, the rule of three, it's all through this book. And if you just have a look at the the top of the next page, we've got a good example of a syndeton or asyndetic coordination, because he's missed out the conjunctions. He's put, but the sun vanished, the coins were spent, the air blew grey. Now, do notice that that's the rule of three again, and it's the rule of three without any conjunctions, and he's missed a conjunction here as well. He's just decided to use a semicolon. The salesman shook himself from the spell. Now we have the rule of three once again here. The first boy shut up one eye, tilted his head, and looked at the salesman with a single eye as open, bright, and clear. Okay, so do notice the three adjectives, three verbs. He's very much following the rule of three. Now, if we go a few pages on, we'll see the same thing here. We've got a lovely sentence here with a lot of repetition. It was in their friendship they just wanted to run forever. Shadow and shadow. So we're repeating shadow. Notice that we've got their friendship, their hands, their chests, their tennis shoes, their friendship right at the end. And I think that these three theirs, their hands slapped library doors handles together, their chests broke track tapes together, their tennis shoes beat parallel pony tracks. Notice that these three there and noun, their hands, their chests, and their tennis shoes, it's there and a plural noun each time, okay? So again, it's following the rule of three. And then we've got the same after this, this list of three. They beat parallel pony tracks over lawns, trimmed bushes, squirreled trees, and again we've got asyndetic coordination. There are no conjunctions in this part. No one losing. Now that no one is interesting because we've already had nobody twice, so that's kind of following the rule of three. Nobody, nobody, no one. They mean the same things, yeah? And here we've got a lovely rule of three as well. We've got no one losing. Let me just put this down for a second. Perhaps we can, so no one losing, both winning, thus saving. No conjunctions noticed. There's asyndetic coordination. And we've got losing, winning, saving. The rule of three being followed with those with those ing forms. Let's think, are they gerunds or participles? No one losing, both winning. They've got to be participles. They're verbs, they're regular verbs. No one losing, both winning, thus saving their friendship for other times of loss. So they're not gerunds, they're participles. But you've got some lovely repetition there, some lovely asyndeton, and anaphora, if we're going to use use the Greek words to explain exactly what they are. And I like using the Greek words, as I said before, just simply to pay homage to the Greeks, who are the grammar experts. There's no doubt about that. Now here's a nice form of anadiplosis, where we've got and always wonder why, comma, why. That's anadiplosis. Why does it happen? We've got another 3, ducking, weaving, bouncing, another 3. They're gerunds, actually. They're not participles. 3 gerunds there. And look at this, what you've got on this page. You've got, it's describing William's dad, and he works in a library. And what's he doing? He wondered, walking through the library, putting out the lights, putting out the lights, putting out the lights. So we just got the same phrase repeated 3 times. Another excellent example of the rule of 3. But you can see other ones here. They feel good, they look good, they are good. Notice the repetition of they. And so you get loads of this rule of 3 in here. A dozen unlit shops, a dozen half-lit, a dozen dying dark. Okay, a dozen repeated 3 times. Shades slivered, doors boomed, keys rattled. Yeah, another good example of the rule of 3. And up here we've got the same thing. We've got the barbers had yanked off the sheets, powdered the customers, trotted them forth. Yeah, yanked, powdered, trotted. And then we've got the druggist's fount had stopped fizzing like a nest of snakes. The insect neons everywhere had ceased buzzing, and the vast glittering acreage of the dime store with its 10 billion metal, glass and paper. So you've got the and noun, the and noun, the and noun, with adjectives in between. And then you've got 3 adjectives here. I mean, there's a lot of the rule of 3 in this book. It's all over the place. You just can't stop seeing it. Not you, not him, not me. Okay, running until dawn, winding up from nothing, winding away to nothing. He did not see them, he did not move, he only listened. I think that's another good example of the rule of 3. So I hope that persuades you all that there is something very useful in studying. Let's perhaps turn this round. So there's something very useful in studying these rhetorical devices. They're actually really handy. They will make your speech and your writing sound much better than it already does if you employ these rules. I'm trying to stop the light from going too heavily on my face. But I'd like to thank you all for watching. I hope that's been useful for you. Please look out for these rhetorical devices in the books that you read, because I'm sure there'll be just as many in the books you read as there are in the books I read. Thank you everybody for watching. Please click on the like or the subscribe if you'd like to subscribe, or if you've enjoyed this lesson, and I hope to see you all soon. Bye bye.